Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 116. Can't get enough Sherlock Holmes.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And it's March. We're marching into March. Are your Irish eyes smiling, Burt?
Ah, faith and begorra, yes. Me Irish eyes are always smiling. But you know, Scott, in this age where the origins of things are so important, I think it's important to remember that we realize you have a choice in podcasts. And that's why we urge you to listen to podcasts that are recorded in America. Although our subject is Sherlock Holmes, a noted person of English abstraction. Believe us, friends, when we say America is the best provider of podcasts in the world. And so when it comes to your ears, be sure that you always listen American.
Wow. I'm going to go out on a limb and just say this is a Sherlock Holmes first podcast.
That's right. We have to make Sherlock grow. Wait a minute, he's always great.
We have an open border policy here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Yes. We welcome your tired, your restless, your refuge, your refuse. We'll take it all. We'll take whatever garbage. Because, look, we're going to be forcing whatever garbage we want on you. So Why should we expect anything less?
That's right. That's right. Hey, now, has anybody ever written about that? What was going on in the dust bins and rubbish bins at Baker Street? There must got to be an article there.
Well, you know what? I think it was the autumn or winter edition. It was the winter edition of the Baker Street Journal. Peter Calamai wrote about the just the state of London and how it was never remarked upon the muck and the horse excrement and everything else that would have been going on in 1895 London out on the streets. And how the worst we ever get, really, is when Holmes remarks about Watson's boots that were scratched when he had to scrape some mud off of them. Otherwise, it was 7 spatters of mud from the dog cart or, a little thing here or there. Peter Calamai really got down and dirty, literally, in what was going on in London in the 1890s. So, but he said maybe it was something that simply wasn't remarked upon because it was such a state of everyday life. It wasn't remarkable. It was just that's the way it was.
Unless there was an unusual color of mud on one's boots that Holmes could espy.
Right. But one wonders, how would he have discerned that mud from the rest of the muck that people were walking to get to his door?
Well, through his monograph on the 440 different kinds of... of clay and mud in northwest London.
I don't have the issue in front of me. It's in the other room. But he said in a contemporary study, there was a woman who had a train on her dress, and after she was out walking around the streets of London, she did an inventory of what came back with her. Everything from 3 toothpicks to pieces of straw to orange peels. I mean, you name it. It was picked up in the streets of London.
Oh, that's funny. I like that.
I heard she was later hired as an official street sweeper. Well, if you have any comments or feedback or what have you to send in to the show, please get in touch with us. You can reach us, of course, through our website, ihearofsherlock.com. You can reach us on email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com. Comments on the show notes will be available for this show, which is number 116 at ihose.co/ihose116. Of course, you can reach us on the social networks. Pick your social network of choice. We are there at I Hear of Sherlock.
Those are still working, are they?
Oh, sure. Why not?
That Gram is still Insta?
As far as anyone else knows, sure.
Okay,
that is still twitting. Yes, all of that.
Yeah. And you can comment at ihearofsherlock. Please comment. We need comments and call us 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323 and record your lovely voice on our gorgeous voicemail.
Of our voicemail will be made available to you. And as a matter of fact, we did have a comment that came in from episode 115, which hopefully you just listened to. That was our interview with Tim Greer on the wonders of Sherlock Holmes and the theater. We got an email from Lee Shackelford. Now, Lee is a name that goes way back in my Sherlockian origins. I've corresponded with him a good deal in the early 1990s. Lee, of course, had written the the play Holmes and Watson, and performed in it for quite some time. That play was resurrected in 2000, and Lee says, "Hey guys, I just listened to episode 115 and found it thoroughly delightful, as the show always is. But I confess I was holding my breath for an hour. Imagine waiting to hear someone identify that glorious 221B set pictured on the website. It's not identified in print, so I thought, well, surely that's because they're going to give it a shout-out on the episode. But alas. Of course, I know that set at a glance because I spent many, many an hour on it. For the record, the scenic designer was Kel Lager, a devoted Sherlockian who was thrilled to have the chance to build the 221B of his dreams for the 2000 production of my play Holmes and Watson at the Hoover Library Theater. Kel had stage managed the off-Broadway production, built many of the props, and managed the special effects. So he had a history with the play going back to 1989. I think his only lingering regret about it is that the VR had to be relatively small, making it A, hard to see, and B, a bit of strain on the credulity. But note the presence of the Moroccan table. It is now in my office at home, somewhat worse for the wear. Oh, the stories I could tell about that set and that production, and perhaps more about the New York City production, like how we learned what happens when you set off the fire alarm in a theater that's on the ground floor of the Citicorp building. In any case, thanks to all three of you for that wonderful hour of podcast fun. It's a great show, and I always thoroughly enjoy it.
Oh, how nice to hear from Lee. Yeah. And that was a lovely set. And how nice of him to correct our omission there. You know, we need to find an octagonal Moroccan table manufacturer.
Well, maybe we should start one.
Perhaps a trapezoidal manufacturer of octagonal tables.
Oh, that's too much math for my brain at this hour.
Or a rectangular manufacturer of octagonal.
That's circular logic, Bert.
Oh, that's right. I thought I felt something coming back behind me. Well, maybe IKEA. You know, we could interest IKEA. It could come with a tiny Swedish wrench.
But then you have to buy a new one every year.
Oh, that's
and
true.
figure out how to assemble it.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
right.
right.
Never mind.
Well, the secret behind us not getting the mention of that set into the recording is unbeknownst to Lee and maybe to you as a listener. We don't select the graphics for the show until it's right before publication time. You know, we do all of our work on the audio, really massaging it and making everyone sound their absolute best, which is pathetic when you think about it. and then when it's time to go live, that's when we choose the graphics, because usually it's me who has forgotten about, oh my gosh, what are we going to do for this? What are we going to use visually to represent this wonderful hour we've just had speaking? And at that point, I scramble to find whatever resources I can, and I grab that, I think, from Tim's presentation. That was one of the images he showed at Chautauqua, and just slapped it up there on the website, which is different from the thumbnail that's used on the audio. So that's the story behind how it's done, and I'm glad we didn't identify it, because it caused Lee to get back in touch. And I think Lee makes a great case for being a guest on the show, unbeknownst to him.
Yes, absolutely.
So we'll have to check that out. And it would be wonderful to be able to read through Holmes and Watson, because I remember hearing about it in the early 90s, back when it was an off-Broadway phenomenon, and would love to hear some of the background stories from Lee. And maybe we can get Kel to join him, too. Who knows? So we'll see.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Well, you know who should join us right now?
Who?
Our friends at the Wessex Press.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex has begun restoring our traditional capital in Winchester, even if it means disturbing the 16th hole of the Hockley Golf Course. Our capital will bring a wealth of treasure back to our people, like the treasures found in Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle in the Newspapers, Volume 3. These restored, newly typeset stories from July to December 1893 show Conan Doyle, the celebrated author, lecturing on the English novelists of the day, and report the presumed death of Sherlock Holmes at the Reichenbach Falls. With 248 pages, this essential volume for your library is available today at our WessexPress.com. Friends, March is the month of expectation. The things we do not know, the persons of prognostication, the Phoebe and the Crow. As the seasons shift, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
Well done. Well, here we are, and this is, as we said, this is an all-news show.
Oh, yes.
This is just a lot of stuff going on in the world of Sherlock Holmes. We don't cover all of it here, but we wanted to cover some of the highlights, some of the stories that stood out to us over the past few weeks that we thought were worth discussing with you in greater depth. So where should we start? Bert?
Let's start with Stephen Fry. We have to, of all these things, we have to start with a bang. And what could be better than Stephen Fry? A wonderful actor who is known for so much in the Sherlockian community. He, of course, has played Mycroft in a film. He is a long-standing member of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. Some of us look back fondly on his portrayal of P.G. Woodhouse's Jeeves in that wonderful series with Hugh Laurie.
Yes.
And I'm a big fan of his from the standpoint of BBC Radio 4 because he's occasionally a panelist on a game show that's now been running for 50 years that I think we've talked about occasionally, Just a Minute, where one has to speak for 60 seconds without hesitation, deviation, or repetition. He's just grand at that. And he's now done the complete Sherlock Holmes stories on Audible.
He has, and they are available at, there's a adbl.co/Holmes, capital H Holmes, or you can just go to audible.com and search for Stephen Fry, Sherlock Holmes. They are available if you would like to join. They're free. No, excuse me, they're $14.95 with an Audible membership. Or if you just like to buy them outright, the collection is priced at $82.77 if you're in the U.S. But this is the entire canon. And to me, what's interesting is that you've got instances of Fry reading introductions to each section. And, oh, you know what? Sorry, it's only 8 collections of Sherlock Holmes because they don't have the rights to the case book in its entirety. So he has 8 introductions to each section, each book or collection. And he's written them himself and reads them. And in one case, he mentions, I think it was the introduction to the memoirs, where he taps into the current craze of Hollywood's fixation on superheroes and superheroes in popular culture. He says, heroes with remarkable gifts are as in vogue now as they have been since they first appeared, perhaps even more in vogue. But although the very first one was launched in serial published form, just like his masked and body-suited successors, it was not in DC or Marvel Comics that he made his appearance. Rather, it was in the sedate and respectable pages of Mrs. Beeton's Christmas Annual in the mid-Victorian year 1887. This Caped Crusader's cape was made of the finest British tweed. His magical gifts were not the ability to fly or X-ray vision. His superpower was that he had trained his mind into a uniquely powerful weapon which could solve mysteries, unmask the guilty, and right wrongs. So with each,
lovely,
yeah, with each one, he's got this unique introduction that, and Stephen Fry is a Sherlockian or a Holmesian, if you will. He took out a membership to the Sherlock Holmes Society of London when he was just 15 or 16. And I think he spoke or presided at the Society's 2005 annual dinner.
Well, he's a remarkable actor and writer. He has had some best-selling novels written. One of his books, published. One of his books that I'm particularly fond of, which I think I mentioned before, is a book called The Ode Less Traveled, which is all about poetry. And so if you have any interest in poetry and you are for some reason looking for an overview, looking for a guide, looking for motivation and stimulation to write your own poetry, which is really, I think, the focus of Stephen's book, I recommend The Ode Less Traveled. He has a lovely introduction for that book. He says, I have a dark and dreadful secret. I write poetry. This is an embarrassing confession for an adult to make. In their idle hours, Winston Churchill and Noel Coward painted. For fun and relaxation, Albert Einstein played the violin. Hemingway hunted. Agatha Christie gardened. James Joyce sang arias. Nabokov chased butterflies. But poetry? And then he goes on. It's really a lovely book.
It sounds quite odious. Sorry.
Odio Colone. Odio Colone.
Well, why don't we get a brief flavor of what Stephen Fry reading the Sherlock Holmes stories sounds like? We'll start with this excerpt from The Sign of Four.
My mind, he said, rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. I can dispense then with artificial stimulants, but I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave for mental exaltation. That is why I have chosen my own particular profession, or rather created it, for I am the only one in the world. The only unofficial detective? I said, raising my eyebrows. The only unofficial consulting detective, he answered. I am the last and highest court of appeal in detection. When Gregson or Lestrade or Athelney Jones are out of their depth, which, by the way, is their normal state, The matter is laid before me. I examine the data as an expert and pronounce a specialist's opinion. I claim no credit in such cases. My name figures in no newspaper. The work itself, the pleasure of finding a field for my peculiar powers, is my highest reward. But you have yourself had some experience of my methods of work in the Jefferson Hope case. Yes, indeed, said I cordially. I was never so struck by anything in my life. I even embodied it in a small brochure with the somewhat fantastic title of A Study in Scarlet. He shook his head sadly. I glanced over it, said he. Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it. Detection is, or ought to be, an exact science, and should be treated in the same cold and unemotional manner. You have attempted to tinge it with romanticism, which produces much the same effect as if you worked a love story or an elopement into the fifth proposition of Euclid.
Well, how about that?
Well, I like that. I like his Watson.
Yeah. I mean, it's not terribly different from Holmes. You know, you think about other narrators, particularly Douglas Wilmer, who I think undertook great character studies in his preparation. Of course, did not read the entire canon, read select stories, but very, very clearly inhabited different places for each character. Fry's, I think, they're different, but there's more subtle differences. And I'm trying to get Jeeves out of my head and hearing Holmes instead. It's a little. It's not the sharp and quick Holmes of Clive Merrison, but it is a pensive and ratiocinative Holmes, I think, of Jeeves.
Yeah. Well, the Jeeves voice was so distinctive, and he was so much younger. It's a bit of a shame that he didn't do Holmes when he was a bit younger, because he has such a rich tonal voice that it's somewhat at odds with a thin athletic younger Holmes. But Stephen Fry is the sort of person that I would cheerfully buy a ticket to watch him read the phone book. But what now? Here's an interesting question: what of all of the actors who played Holmes, which have recorded? I mean, not on radio now, but which have recorded actual readings of the stories? Am I right in remembering that Rathbone did? I don't remember what, but there must be some.
He did 3 stories, I think. He did The Red-Headed League, and I think Silver Blaze, and The Final Problem.
Oh, I should go back and listen. I don't know that I've ever heard them. I have all of those radio programs, but I don't know that I've ever heard Rathbone reading.
Yeah.
Be interesting to hear how he handled the voicing. But of course, today I think it's more a challenge for an actor to do it in character when you're reading the stories. I mean, when I used to read my kids the Harry Potter books when they were quite small, I would try to do a different voice for each character.
Yeah.
But I think in the old days, in the Rathbone days, you were perhaps not spending so much attention in trying to do that.
That could very well be.
So who else other than Rathbone? And you mentioned Wilmer.
Yeah, I know. I have a collection of. I know he didn't play Holmes, but he was in the Granada production. I have a collection of stories read by Robert Hardy.
Oh, right.
And he read Charles Augustus Milverton, and he actually played Charles Augustus Milverton in the Granada series. And I actually enjoyed his reading of Milverton better than his portrayal of Milverton.
Oh, he's a great actor. Did you ever see him do Churchill?
Yes.
He's fabulous. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, speaking of Harry Potter, he was in the Harry Potter series as well as the Minister of Magic.
Yeah.
So, other than that, I don't know if any of the greats did. There was a collection that came out in the 90s. During the Granada popularity, early to mid-90s, that was read by Edward Hardwicke. So you've got your Watson narrating. But beyond that, I don't know.
Interesting.
And, of course, this is a great plug for one of our earlier episodes, episode 40, I believe, One Voice of Sherlock Holmes, where we had David Ian Davies on.
Yeah,
and
terrific.
His fine collection as well. And there's a guy who does all the characters as well, so worth another listen there.
Oh, and he's done a magnificent job really creating very distinctive character voices. Yeah,
really has. And even the female characters, too, which was impressive. I remember we talked with him about that. So make sure you check out episode 40 with David Ian Davies if you haven't heard that, or if you haven't heard it in a while. It'd be great. And, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we had taken this opportunity, seeing the news of this Audible collection. We took the opportunity to reach out to Stephen Fry and invite him on the show, as we have done in the past. Of course, he played Mycroft Holmes in Sherlock Holmes' Game of Shadows, and we thought that would be a great time to get him on. He was very busy traveling and writing and all the rest. And we asked him about coming on this time, and once again, through his assistant, he very politely refused. So it's too bad, really. So here's an opportunity. As a fan of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, which we assume you are if you're listening, I wonder what a fan-generated petition might do. That if you can create some sort of public petition, band together, do your thing, I don't care, talk with each other on the iHose Facebook page, and get Stephen Fry, who is on Twitter. Maybe we can get a hashtag, Fry does iHose, or something like that. Maybe we can pressure him into if there are enough fans that really want to hear him on the show. Let's see if we can make it happen. What's the worst that could happen?
We could wind up talking to a grumpy Stephen.
Well,
Fry.
he'll impolite. Well, that's true. That wouldn't be any fun. Or next time he'll impolitely refuse. So we'll see. Well, it's great to have audio, but it's also wonderful to experience Sherlock Holmes in the original writing. And here we have an article from the Daily Utah Chronicle about the case to make Sherlock Holmes required reading. This was written by Alex Judd, and I think it was an op-ed piece. They talked about giving a talk at a medical school, and how the case was made for medical students, if they wanted to be more observant, if they wanted to be better practitioners, that the requirement would be just read Sherlock Holmes. If you want to understand what it takes to observe and make educated guesses, read Sherlock Holmes. And he, as a med student at the time, thought it was a little bit of an odd suggestion. But he goes through and makes the case that actually, yes, if Sherlock Holmes was in fact inspired by a medical doctor, why wouldn't you take those tales in which Conan Doyle very artfully talks about the practice of observation and deduction, or as we know, induction, and use that as a basis for developing your own skill set. It's not a handbook per se, but it is something that through fiction helps young practitioners become better at their craft.
Well, one of the people that I follow and I have an enormous amount of respect for in the healthcare arena is Atul Gawande, who is a writer and a practicing physician. And in the New York Times Book Review a couple of years ago, they had an interview with Gawande and asked him, so who is your favorite doctor character in fiction? And he said Dr. Watson in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I've been hooked on Sherlock Holmes for years. Every story is a kind of diagnosis, and Watson's is the inviting voice of the entire series. He is intelligent, observant, and faithful the way we want all doctors to be. He's also guileless and naive, where Holmes is neither, and that is his ultimate limitation in each mystery. But his lack of cunning is why we trust him, and why Holmes does, too.
Very astute.
Yeah, isn't that nice? And that's very similar to this particular observation about insights into diagnosis and treatment that can be garnered by consulting the Canon.
Well, of course, as we've often said here, this is a collection of stories that goes just beyond the scientific, and I think Watson himself echoed that. Holmes was critical, of course, saying that you've worked romance into this, and it has as much place there as romance in the fifth proposition of Euclid. But as we've observed many times, that this is a textbook of friendship. That phrase, of course, was said first by Christopher Morley in his book, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, A Textbook of Friendship. And it's very clear that one can learn a great deal about the human condition, about friendship, about working relationships, about history, about philosophy, and of course, as Alex Judd makes the case here, about medicine. There's a great deal to be learned in these 60 stories. So, a treasure trove indeed.
Sort of a cheap shot by Holmes, though, when everyone knows that it was the fourth proposition of Euclid that dealt with valentines and chocolates and roses and things like that.
Oh, Euclid, I hardly knew ye. Well, why don't we head on over to our friends at VentureBeat that report to us that there is a new streaming video service that is coming to the United States.
Oh, thank goodness.
Right? Well, hey, because you haven't had enough with Amazon and Netflix and Hulu and, all of the specific networks now that have their own on-demand service, CBS and HBO and Showtime and on and on and on. Just what you need, another app. However, we can make a case for this one. Very clearly, really? Because this is called BritBox.
Ooh.
BritBox, and what you'll get with BritBox is, well, let me read the intro paragraph. If you have a penchant for British TV shows but happen to live in the U.S., you'll be delighted to know of a new subscription service that's now available from two of the UK's biggest broadcasters. BBC Worldwide, the commercial arm of the UK's public service broadcasting body, has partnered with the commercial network ITV to launch BritBox, a video-on-demand service consisting of UK shows from both broadcasters. It's now available for only $7 a month and is exclusive to the United States. So, what will you get with your BritBox subscription? Shows like the UK version of The Office, the original Office, thank you very much, if you please. Fawlty Towers, James Corden's Gavin and Stacey, and, of course, the very reason that we are here, the original Granada Sherlock Holmes. So you can get that on demand. If you don't have a DVD player, if you don't have regular access to the Sherlock Holmes stories, and we have said before, Tim Greer remarked last episode that pound for pound, the best production of Sherlock Holmes stories, in his opinion, was Granada.
Yes. Well, it's a worthwhile addition. The real problem, and I'm sure you found this too, I occasionally will have my laptop or my phone in the kitchen, and I'll be watching something on a particular streaming service, and I'll be called away to do something else. And when I get back, I find that video is just streamed all over the floor of the kitchen. And cleaning it up can be such a problem. You've got to go down and get a mop, towels. So streaming services are okay as long as you make sure to turn them off, when you're not watching them.
That's why you need the new Sherlock Holmes brand streaming service mop.
Friends, are you tired of wringing all of the facts out of these stories? Well, run a few of them over your kitchen floor and then pick up your Sherlock Holmes mop.
Oh, boy. Well, this is the problem with a number of services. Like, let's take Netflix, for example. Great service. Has tons and tons of titles available. But and a friend of mine who works in Silicon Valley said the future is, streaming services. Nobody's going to be carting around, cases and cases of DVDs anymore as they move homes or as they're looking for something to watch. You're simply going to open up your, the app or your phone, wherever it happens to reside, and you're going to look for that title in the cloud, so to speak. Well, that's great until you realize that Netflix, A, hasn't contracted with the entity that produced the show that you're looking to watch, or B, they did contract with them, but because they only offer a certain number of titles at any given time, it's on a rolling basis, and you may not be there at the time that they offer it to watch on demand. So having an alternative like this, having an alternative like BritBox that's specifically designed for that kind of programming that you enjoy, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, it's a very good point. Well, that's one of the amazing things about digital technology. In the old days, I remember my friend Chris Steinbrenner, may he rest in peace, his desire in life was to watch every mystery film that had ever been made. And I think he got pretty close. And in his house, in the basement, actually in his garage, he had just stacks and he was professionally he was the film director for the RKO General television stations, which was WOR in New York and others, and he just had reels and reels and reels and reels and reels and reels of movies, and they were obviously enormously expensive. And then, today on DVD, you can pretty much find an enormous amount of things relatively cheaply. But then, as you point out, you can have instant access pretty much over any of these services, provided, as you point out, you're sort of there at the right time and they've got the right contracts. So the amazing thing about modern technology is how much it brings everything back. You can go to YouTube and look at Arthur Wantner and things you'd never thought you'd be able to see from the 1930s and the 1920s.
Yeah.
And yet we learn from Russell Merritt that because of still, some very arcane history about the distribution of films in the 1930s, for some reason, there are just a huge number of silent films that have never been shown and may never be shown in the United States for one reason or another, because they're owned by this company that was bought by that company, and that they're over here and they're not over there, and they haven't been restored and they haven't been digitized.
It's amazing the complexity that goes into some of that. But and then, of course, if you want to watch British programming that is currently on, one way to do that, and you didn't hear it here, folks, if you want to watch, say, the Sherlock series before everyone else here on PBS, there are extensions you can get for the Chrome browser, for example, that allow you to use a VPN, basically, to mask the country where it is you're dialing in from, and to make it make the browser or the entity think like you're dialing in from Great Britain, to be able to watch that programming. So there are ways to work around the system if you really, really want to. But I would imagine that something like BritBox will just allow you to refine the types of things that you want, allow you to pick up where you've left off, and all the rest. So and I know just last night I fell asleep after watching way too many episodes of the original House of Cards from 1990 with Ian Richardson, another actor who portrayed Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, isn't that fabulous, that original House of Cards?
I love it. I really do.
You might very well think so, Matty, but I couldn't possibly comment.
Just like Richard III. So...
It's interesting, though. I wonder how BritBox, because Acorn in the States had been mounting a subscription service, and I thought that was also connected to the BBC. Maybe I'm wrong.
I don't know.
I know they had a subscription service because some things that I'd been following, turn out to be only available on that. But, anyway, that's clearly, the direction of the future.
We've been discussing a number of news-related items in this episode, all of which have an underlying theme. We simply can't get enough of Sherlock Holmes. And it's no different at the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship, where the phrase, "we can't get enough of Sherlock Holmes," could easily stand in for Christopher Morley's one-time observation, "Never before has so much been written by so many for so few." As Homer Simpson would say, "It's funny because it's true." Since 1946, Sherlockians have been contributing to the literature of the subject in the pages of the BSJ, and there's no sign of abatement anytime soon. For example, in the most recent issue alone, we have Peter Calamai's look at the sanitation conditions in 1890s London, Sarah Obermuller-Bennett's take on Victorian vegetarians, and Michael Keane's keen analysis of Conan Doyle's secret weapon in World War I. We'll bet you can guess what it was. And that's just a smattering of what's available in a single issue of the Baker Street Journal. So we think that "we can't get enough of Sherlock Holmes" is a fine slogan for the Baker Street Journal. And it's certainly easier to pronounce than "Si queris monumentum circum spice." If you agree with the sentiment of not being able to get enough Sherlock Holmes, then please pick up a subscription of the BSJ by going to bakerstreetjournal.com today.
Yes, and when you have put down the latest issue of the Baker Street Journal, although that's very difficult to do, you could turn your attention over to copyblogger.com, where Robert the Bruce has written a lovely, interesting post about Sherlock Holmes and mastering the craft of writing. And his title here, or his subhead really, is "Choose, Focus, Become an Idiot." And, he picks up on...
Wait, is he related to Nigel?
I can only hope he could be so lucky. Although he does start out, with really a calumny here. He says, "Though merely a fiction written over a century ago by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle."
Come on.
Yeah, but he goes on to say Holmes' methods of logical deduction are without equal, and that Holmes, the character of Holmes, the habits of Holmes, can teach us about the craft of writing. And he points out, as he says in the subhead here, "Choose, focus, become an idiot." Focus, make a conscious decision about the few things that you want to decide to master in your craft. And so he says really just the opposite of people who say, you really do need to become a well-rounded individual with a little Latin, a little Greek, a little science, a little biology. He says, if you want to master your craft, forget about that.
Yeah.
Distraction, he says, pulls us in all directions. If you want to master writing, you're giving up running the 800 meters in the Olympic Games. If you want to master the cello, give up the ability to talk about what's good on television these days. And to become obsessive and focused, which I think certainly has a very good point. But I was a bit sad that he didn't focus a bit on Conan Doyle as a writer and how the construction of the cases of Sherlock Holmes are great examples for writers.
Well, maybe he's not familiar enough with the story. I think there's kind of an overview here. The section where he talks about becoming an idiot. He says in order to focus your your working life on mastering a craft, you've got to get rid of a lot of the effluvia, a lot of the trivia that takes up so much time. So, for example, Holmes could, as we mentioned earlier, could determine what part of the city you've been in from a quick glance at the type of mud on your boot. But on the other hand, he was a subjectively horrible violin player. Well, looking in the comments section of this article, someone named Scott Monty wrote in.
Oh, my goodness.
And said, from Watson's list about Sherlock Holmes' accomplishments in A Study in Scarlet, we've got number 10, plays the violin well.
Well, yes, and then I see he goes on and says, well, in several stories we read lines like scrape carelessly at the fiddle. Well, his powers at the violin. Well, but, that's could also be looked at as something remarkable. I mean, that he could get sounds out of an instrument that was just so carelessly placed in his lap. But, well, anyway. Yeah, of all the things to quarrel about, I wouldn't be picking about Holmes's violin. And listen, where do you get off, telling me that I should be disregarding effluvia? You're talking about the woman of my dreams.
You need better dreams. That's all. That's all there is. That is it. Well, there is another story in the news here. I thought this was pretty interesting. It's from the site Mysterious Universe, and I always love these, life imitating art, or vice versa, as the case may be, or life imitating art imitating life. This is Hounds, yes, plural, of the Baskervilles, real-life myths and mysteries of Dartmoor's famous Hound Tour. And, of course, you know that when Conan Doyle visited Dartmoor in the early 1900s, that's where he was inspired to write the resurrection, as we know, of Sherlock Holmes in The Hound of the Baskervilles. The West Country legend that he mentions. And there are actual legends in the Dartmoor, Devon areas of the English countryside. Spectral packs of dogs said to roam the area. And that's where Hound Tor actually got its name. So the author of this article just mentions similar legends of hellhounds roaming the area. And that's where Doyle got his inspiration. As a matter of fact, Hound Tour got its name from one of those legends, where let's see. The legend goes that back in ancient days, a hunter called Bowerman had lived there on the moor, and whilst hunting with his pack of dogs, disrupted the ceremonies of a local coven of witches. Punishment would ensue, but not until the next time Bowerman and his dogs were out on the moor, at which time one of the disgruntled witches transformed into a rabbit. A rabbit! Look! leading Bowerman and his dogs off in what they presumed to be a hunt, which resolved in the hunting party becoming stuck in a mire. The huntsman and his hounds were transformed into stone, and today a large stony outcrop is recognized as Bowerman's Nose for its profile-like features. The stony protrusions on a ridge nearby became the famous Hound Tor. So it is an area that is rife with legends and rife with obviously just the physical manifestations of the landscape there, inspiring folks to see things, whether they're seeing actual things or representations of things. We'll see.
Well, a couple of interesting things about this posting at mysteriousfuniverse.org. And by the way, you can find links to all of this in the show notes, these things, as well as on our flipboard page at flipboard.com/I Hear of Sherlock. But one is the writer makes the point that the creature might well have most closely resembled a bear, though no bear or other large animals exist in England, having been hunted to extinction by the 16th century. Now, I had no idea that bears became extinct through hunting in the 1500s in England, and that there weren't any bears in England. I mean, that's seems to me to be a strange thing somehow, but I guess it says so on the internet, so it must be so. And then he goes on and says, so if it wasn't a bear, what could it have been? And then he says, well, maybe it was a feral boar, and shows this photograph of a feral boar, which was almost hunted to extinction in Britain, but not. So that's something that I'd never thought of before as associated with these legends. And then the other interesting thing is
wait a minute, though. I think that, again, this is an error of Dr. Watson. Maybe something we should pick up on trifles. Was it just a typo? Bear or boar? You tell me.
Oh, I like that. That's very good. Yeah. Bad handwriting. Well, and the other interesting thing in this post, they have a photograph which has got nothing to do with the posting, of Peter Cushing, one of my favorite actors, playing Holmes. But it's a photograph that shows Cushing in his dressing gown. And this is one of the things that I was always surprised that they got wrong, because it's so well known. And speaking of trifles, we've obviously discussed this, of Holmes's multicolored dressing gown. And there is Cushing in a brown plaid dressing gown. It just seems to me to be so unusual, because clearly this thing was custom made for him, and why they decided to create that particular garment is just strange.
I don't know. And it clashes with the wallpaper.
Yeah.
Horribly. Yeah.
It's a real eye test.
Who knew? Well, and, in thinking about this article, I pulled a book off of my shelf that I hadn't looked at in quite a while, and now that I'm flipping through it, I realize it's a very rich source. This is a book from 2001. Let me make sure of the publication date.
Yeah.
2001. Yeah,
I bought books in 2001.
Yeah,
maybe I haven't.
It's amazing how they stand the test of time. By Philip Weller, called The Hound of the Baskervilles, Hunting the Dartmoor Legend.
Oh.
By Devon Books. And you talk about appropriate places. He has, all sorts of things in here, from just an overall view of, the Sherlock Holmes stories, how we got to the Hound of the Baskervilles. And then he looks at historical sources, literary sources, legendary sources, invented Houndian locations, the authorship controversy, the Hound on the screen, the Houndian phenomenon, and more, where he really gets into some of the West Country legends and some of the Dartmoor legends here, both real and invented. And the locations, I should say, real and invented. So I may go back and read this now, because it's been a long time since I had. I don't think I ever read it in its entirety. Just one of those things where it came out. I think it was in conjunction with one of the BSI distinguished lectures, if I'm not mistaken, around that time.
So Weller spoke?
No. I forget who it was that spoke now.
About the Hound?
Yeah, and about Conan Doyle's diary during that time.
Oh, I remember that. That was Sir Christopher Frayling.
Yes, Frayling. Yeah.
Yeah. But that wasn't in 2001.
No, well, it was shortly thereafter, I think.
My goodness, it can't be that long ago. No, I thought that was a splendid talk, and I really wanted to get copies of his slides, and I think I did. In fact, I think
I did too.
Yeah, I think
that was 2008.
That
wasn't that long ago. 2008.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Well, maybe you then found this book
I think
at
that's
that
what
weekend.
Yeah.
Interesting. I never heard of the book.
Yeah. Great review of the book by our friend Charles Prepelec on his site, Baker Street Dozen. So check that out. Very good book. And well worth revisiting.
Frailing gave a great talk for those folks who weren't there or haven't heard about it, although we probably said something about it in a show around that time. But what had happened was he had purchased at auction, I believe, Conan Doyle's pocket diary for 1906 or whatever the year was. 1902 or whatever the year.
Yeah, something around there.
In which you could actually chart Conan Doyle's movements in Cornwall. I went to this hotel, and then I spent some time over here, and then he came back, and et cetera, et cetera. And Sir Christopher gave, a great talk about connecting all of those facts and insights to the creation of Hound of the Baskervilles.
I did remember having those slides at one time. Now I don't know where they are.
Well, they're available on a streaming service.
They're locked away in my BritBox.
Excellent.
How do you spell relief? Gaslamp. It's time for the editor's gas lamp, folks. And since we've been talking all about Sherlock Holmes, current events, superheroes, we thought we would turn to a modern-day essay. We've turned a few times to Edgar Smith and his wonderful essay, The Implicit Holmes, which stands the test of time. And there's really no one who can write like Edgar did. However, our friend Lyndsay Faye, BSI, Ash, Baker Street Babe, she has a new book out called The Whole Art of Detection, The Lost Mysteries of Sherlock Holmes. We've got a link to that in the show notes. She wrote a guest editorial on bookish.com called Why the World Can't Get Enough of Sherlock Holmes. And we read it, and we thought, well, this would be an interesting addition to our show. So let's go. Sherlock Holmes. He's an elegant gentleman scientist, illustrated in subtle grayscale, strolling through the pages of classic literature, wearing a top hat and tails. He's abstract symbols, a deerstalker and magnifying glass painted on the side of a security company's van. He's a brawny blockbuster action hero, shirtless, adorned with stubble and sweat. He's a cartoon mouse. He's a classic Hollywood film icon. He's a radio personality. He's a runaway hit BBC television series. Sherlock Holmes is all of these things, and more of them besides. So, who is he really? And why do we keep insisting on more of him? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's iconic character got off to a rocky start in life. A Study in Scarlet sold, to put it kindly, not at all well. The Sign of Four did little to rescue our hero from the doldrums. It was only after Doyle serialized Holmes into meticulously crafted episodic mysteries published in the Strand magazine that Holmes took off. Took off like a spacecraft on steroids. The family magazine was already popular, but once the eccentric bohemian crime solver began to appear, its circulation immediately ballooned. Edgar Allan Poe's revolutionary armchair logician C. Auguste Dupin admittedly predated the great detective, but Dupin sat comfortably in his Paris flat and a veritable brain in a jar, working out his chains of reasoning. But Sherlock Holmes and his partner, Dr. John Watson, they had adventures. Most of the 56 original short stories begin with that perfect phrase, that fairy tale combination of words crafted to tickle our brains and speed our pulse rates. The adventure of The Adventure of the Speckled Band, in which Holmes and Watson keep vigil in a house haunted by grief and greed, lying in wait for a deadly serpent to slither down a bell pull. The Adventure of the Copper Beeches, in which a spirited governess is made to cut off her hair and wear an electric blue gown, all the while forbidden to enter the estate's grim and lonesome tower. The Adventure of the Six Napoleons, in which a seemingly random series of attacks on Napoleon's bust leads to murder, mayhem, and the long-lost Black Pearl of the Borgias. Sherlock Holmes sits, cogitating in armchairs, to be certain, but he also wields guns, sprints to the aid of the helpless, and faces slavering hellhounds. There's no shortage of adrenaline, and it's for the young and young at heart alike, and it's marvelous. Not to reduce the Holmes to a vigilante in a cape-backed greatcoat battling villains like some Victorian Bruce Wayne, although the comparison does seem to hold some water. Holmes is 17 steps ahead of us at every turn, and, as seen through the eyes of his loyal doctor friend, he positively glows. In this era of false facts and a dismissal of science, there's something electric about believing in a protagonist who relies solely on observation and deduction. A man who views the world both as it is and as it should be. Lie and distort and prevaricate how you like, and Sherlock Holmes can see through you, right to the marrow, and he carves away with wit and insight until the truth is laid bare for all to witness. If justice depends on truth, then such a hero is truly timeless. He reflects all that is steady and rational about our confused human state. Above all, Sherlock Holmes is, at the end of the day, a good man. Perhaps he's less patient than his stalwart companion, granted, and he admittedly finds himself in the dumps from time to time. Drugs make an appearance. He gets ahead of himself, and he makes mistakes, and on occasion, Holmes, like the rest of us, needs to be forgiven. But he remains our champion, and until humankind tires of flawed knights who risk their lives in the service of others, Sherlock Holmes will stay with us. Age doth not wither nor custom stale his infinite variety, nor his capacity to help us believe that a single person can make our world a better place.
Well said.
Well, well written. I'll leave that to Lyndsay. That just goes to show how we will continue to have fodder for this show into the foreseeable future. Sherlock Holmes is timeless, after all.
Yeah. Well, and it's a lovely observation, about the power of one individual to make the world a better place, which we should not forget.
Indeed. Do not forget. And please do not forget, if this show has moved you in some way, do not forget to show your appreciation. A comment would be fine, but we'd also appreciate financial support. If you go to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or the IHearOfSherlock.com website, you can find ways to donate to us. Patreon is great. If you want to send us a donation through PayPal, that would help too. And your contributions go towards us hosting these audio files. As people download them, we need to pay for the bandwidth. They pay for the hosting of the website, for our email service. And now we're beginning to turn to transcription services. We are putting transcriptions together for each of our shows, and we're working through the backlog of all other 115 episodes of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. It pays for those transcriptions as well, and that helps people find us, and it helps those with audio difficulties, hard of hearing and deafness. It helps them enjoy the show as well. So hopefully you will be able to be part of that equation. I hear of Sherlock.
And this is a great opportunity too for us to make the shows better, so that once we can get these transcriptions, we can really improve the content.
Yeah, I wish these scripts that we write out beforehand would translate into something written for everyone else.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, we use this encrypted secure communication medium called Blather, the app Blather. And as soon as you read the script once, it's gone. And I told you that was a strategic mistake.
Well, that would explain that would explain why I shouldn't be reading Blather ahead of time.
That's right.
Lest these scripts disappear on us.
That's right. But, the transcriptions are great because then you can just select, the entire text for an hour and 15 minutes, and then just delete it, and then just put in 5 or 6 sentences, that are really well written. And I think it's a great improvement.
Anything's got to be better than this. Well, when we join you here again next time, we will have a very special guest who we will be interviewing. Who will it be? You'll have to tune in to find out. And until then, I will try to remain Scott Monty.
Correct. Yes, and I am secure in my commitment to be Burt Walder at least for another few weeks.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
Blah, 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 Baker Street Journal, blah, blah, blah. Okay.